Good morning, or afternoon if you're watching in the afternoon. We are going to be hearing another version of the story that you read about Romulus and Remus already. So this is from a book called The Story of the World. For those of you who've been at the school before, you know that these are some wonderful stories about different events that have taken place over history. So this one is about the ancient world. So it covers all of the areas in BC or BCE, before Jesus Christ was born. We are in the era of CE, called Common Era, or AD. Anno Domini is the Latin form for that. So we're going to hear about the rise of Rome with the story of Romulus and Remus from this version of it today. Now, Assyria was a great kingdom, but it was conquered by Babylon. Babylon was a great empire, but it was conquered by Persia. Persia and Greece were great empires, but they were conquered by Alexander the Great. Y'all remember that? I know you learned about that in second grade, I think. Alexander the Great built his own huge kingdom, but then he died, and his generals broke the kingdom up into pieces. Now that's what the story of the ancient world is like. One king comes along, wins battles, and builds a huge empire. His empire lasts for a little while, but the kings who come after him slowly lose control of it. Then another king from another country does the same thing and builds another empire. After a little while, that empire too falls apart. This happens over and over and over again. So you won't be surprised to learn that we're going to learn now about another big empire. You've heard about Babylon, Persia, Greece in years prior to this. Now here's another big empire. This one was bigger and stronger than any empire we've read or learned about here at school. It grew to be bigger than Alexander the Great's empire. And I know our Alexander likes to hear about Alexander the Great. And it lasted much longer. As a matter of fact, it lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years. Over 1,000 years after this empire fell, people were still learning its language, reading its books, and copying its government. This empire was called Rome. At first, Rome was just a tiny village in the hills of Italy. Go west from Greece. This is the direction of west. And you'll see a piece of land that looks like a boot jutting down into the Mediterranean Sea. This is called a peninsula because it sticks out into the water. This peninsula is Italy. Now, the people who lived in Rome told this story about the village's beginning. Once upon a time, a great king named Numitor had twin grandsons, strong, healthy baby boys, named Romulus and Remus. But Numitor also had a wicked younger brother who plotted against him and stole his throne. The new evil king wanted to get rid of anyone who might claim to be the rightful king. "Those babies might grow up to take my crown," he said. "Go put them in the Tiber River." So a servant took the boys down to the Tiber River, but she felt sorry for them and put them into a basket and pushed it out into the current. The basket floated along the river until it got stuck in the root of a fig tree at the river's edge. That might have been the end of the two boys, but a wolf heard them crying. She peered around the trunk of the fig tree and saw the basket with the babies in it. Now this wolf had cubs of her own. She felt pity for the two hungry babies, and so she tugged the basket up onto the bank and then back to her own den. There she raised the babies with her own wolf cubs as her own. One day, a shepherd who was out looking for a lost lamb heard a coo and then a gurgle from the brush surrounding the wolf's den. He pushed some branches aside and there saw two fat, happy baby boys lying naked among the wolf cubs. Once again, very similar to Mowgli in the Jungle Book. The shepherd and his wife had no children of their own, so he took the boys home, and 2 of them raised the babies to be tall, handsome young men. Now, when Romulus and Remus were grown, they went back to the fig tree where their basket had landed so many years ago. They looked around, and they saw 7 hills. "This is the perfect place to build a town," they said to each other. "A town on top of these 7 hills would be strong and hard to attack." Now, this is the part of the story that's probably true. It's probably not true that there were twins named Romulus and Remus raised by a wolf. However, the fact that they saw these 7 hills and thought this would be hard to attack, because if you are on top of a hill, it is very difficult for an enemy to get to you before you're able to look down at them and shoot some bows and arrows, right? Or the arrows themselves, not the bows. Now, so they began to build a town, and Romulus declared himself the king of this new town. He put himself in charge of building a wall around it. "This wall will keep us safe," he declared. "Anyone who climbs over my wall will be instantly killed." But Remus was angry with his brother. He thought to himself, "We built this town together. Why should Romulus be the ruler of it? I want to be the leader." So he walked up to the wall and vaulted easily over it. Y'all know what vaulting is? Pole vaulting is when you put a pole down and he would just jump right over the top, or not jump, but holding on to the top of it, he's able to just go right over the top of the wall. "What kind of a wall is that?" he sneered. "Anyone can climb over it. How can you keep this town safe?" Now, Romulus was so angry that he drew his sword, charged at his brother, and killed him on the spot. Then he named the town Rome after himself. He was Rome's first king. Different in some ways than the story that we read from your history book, right? We'll think about some of those specific differences in a moment, but think about what you notice that's different so far. What does this story remind you of? Have you ever heard the story of Sargon, the ruler of one of the very first kingdoms we studied? He floated down the river in a basket until someone rescued him. And I'm also thinking of Moses. We talked about that with the last story as well. Moses floating in a basket on a river is similar to this. And do you remember Cyrus, or have you heard of Cyrus? He was also raised by shepherds in the woods. Ancient people liked these stories about their kings. The stories made the kings seem even more legendary, like great fairy tale heroes who could do anything. So we saw that in our last story as well, that it seemed wonderful that the gods would be involved with this story and the founding of Rome. It would make the city of Rome seem much more important, possibly to the Romans. Okay, I'm going to open up my book and look at the legend of Romulus and Remus here. And we know that Mars, in our story before, was the one who had these twin boys. Who was mentioned here? Well, there was a great king named Numitor, who had twin grandsons. For those of you who maybe know mythology better than me, you would be able to tell, possibly, do you know if Numitor was Mars's father? That would make sense, possibly. And there was a wicked younger brother who plotted against him and stole his throne. So it's their grandfather's brother who is the one who sent them to Earth. Here, it was just an uncle. But it could be a great uncle. We also find a big difference in how Remus was killed. Do you remember in our story from yesterday that we only heard this? Let me reread it. The brothers began to argue. They fought over where to start building the city. And during this fight, Romulus killed Remus. So that's how Romulus became the first king of Rome. In this story, we hear that Romulus and Remus were both somehow aligned with the city being the city of 7 hills right around that region of the Tiber River. But Remus was just getting jealous of Romulus acting like he was in charge. Romulus built this wall. Remus was trying to tell him, no, that's not a real wall. They both were pretty prideful, I'd say, right? Romulus, he was being bossy and taking charge and saying, this is my responsibility in city. And then Remus was feeling like, what about me? I'm your twin brother. I should have an equal part of this. And then Romulus kills Remus because he starts to get so angry and possibly feeling a little bit hurt that Remus is starting to say, this isn't a real wall, right? So that is another version of the legend, very similar, but with Arabian Nights, we talked about this as well. The stories of Aladdin and Sinbad, there's a few variations of those stories over time because there's not one true author. The same thing for a legend. There's not one true author. A lot of people have told this over time. A lot of things are in common. We saw most of this story was pretty similar to yesterday's. There also is a hint of a truth in legends. For example, the part about it being a city on 7 hills. So you'll see that actually in tomorrow's reading as you find out the true history or what we know of the true history of how Rome was founded. Okay, hope that you're enjoying it so far. I will talk to you later. Bye.